Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are talking about 1917. It's the year that didn't just change the Great War, it completely broke it wide open. This is the year the entire conflict was reset. You see, by the start of 1917, the war had become this machine, just chewing up lives with brutal efficiency. The Western Front was just a scar across Europe, a static line of trenches, mud, and death. But here's the thing you gotta understand. Both sides were absolutely convinced they were just one massive, bloody push away from total victory. To break that deadlock, each side thought they had the silver bullet for 1917. For the Allies, the answer was on land. For the Germans, it was at sea. But as we're about to see, both of these huge, high-stakes gambles would backfire in the most spectacular way, completely transforming the very nature of the war. All right, so let's dig into why the old ways of fighting were failing so catastrophically. It all kicked off with a huge French offensive, one that promised to finally win the war. The French commander, Robert Nivelle, he was just brimming with confidence. He promised a knockout blow in 48 hours. But his plan, well, it was basically just a bigger, more ambitious version of tactics that had already failed over and over. And his British allies, guys like Prime Minister Lloyd George, they were deeply skeptical. The attack was an absolute catastrophe. See, the Germans had adapted. They'd come up with this new elastic defense, where they'd actually lure the French into a kill zone, soak up the attack, and then just inflict horrific losses. The spirit of the French army was completely broken. It led to mutinies on a massive scale. With the French army essentially crippled by these mutinies, the whole burden of the war just shifted onto the British. So, in the summer, they launched their own major attack, the Third Battle of Ypres, a name now synonymous with pure horror, Passchendaele. Just try to imagine it. 3 solid months of fighting in a literal swamp of mud and corpses, all to gain just 12 kilometers of ground. This was Passchendaele. It was absolute proof that the war of attrition wasn't just a strategy anymore. It was a human meat grinder, and it was failing. Now, while the Western Front was consuming an entire generation, an even bigger strategic earthquake was shaking the East. Russia was about to implode, and its collapse, well, it would change absolutely everything. In less than a year, think about that, the Russian Empire went from being this major combatant, the famous Russian steamroller, to a nation in total revolutionary chaos. The 300-year-old Romanov dynasty, gone, and the army was about to follow. Okay, what's really fascinating here is how a single political order could completely shatter an entire army's discipline. This order number 1, it essentially democratized the military overnight. It meant soldiers could just elect their own committees and basically vote on whether or not to follow orders. It made command impossible and led to mass desertions. So, what did this all mean for the war? Well, with Russia completely out of the picture, Germany could suddenly shift nearly 1 million of its best, most battle-hardened soldiers from the Eastern Front straight to the West. The whole balance of power was about to tip big time. But, you know how these things go. Just as one great power was exiting the stage, another one was being reluctantly dragged onto it, and its arrival would fundamentally change the long-term arithmetic of the entire war. For years, the United States was absolutely determined to remain neutral. American public opinion was firmly against getting involved in what most people saw as Europe's problem. But Germany was getting desperate, and desperate gambles were about to make neutrality impossible to hold on to. So first, Germany restarted unrestricted submarine warfare, a huge gamble to starve Britain. Then came the infamous Zimmermann telegram, where they basically tried to get Mexico to attack the US. And finally, the sinking of American ships. Those were the overt acts, the final straw that left President Wilson with no other choice. Now, let's be clear. The US Army was small. It wasn't really prepared for this kind of war, not at first. But America's entry brought something the Allies desperately needed, the promise of almost unbelievable financial resources, massive industrial power, and a virtually limitless pool of fresh manpower. So by the end of 1917, you have to picture this. The entire strategic chessboard had been flipped over. You had 2 revolutions, the total collapse of a massive army, and the entry of a new global power. Everything had changed.
This table just brilliantly illustrates that transformation. The slow, grinding war of attrition that had defined the first 3 years, it was suddenly over. It was replaced by a desperate, high-stakes race against time.
And it wasn't just the grand strategy that was changing. It was the fighting itself. The Germans perfected their elastic defense, this clever tactic of absorbing an attack and then hitting back with a vicious counterpunch. At the same time, the Allies were finally learning how to combine their infantry, artillery, and the new terror of the battlefield, the tank, into these single, synchronized assaults. The age of just running at machine guns was thankfully coming to an end. So the stalemate was finally broken. But this didn't bring peace, not even close. It just replaced the grim certainty of the trenches with a new, terrifying, and incredibly urgent question. And that was the question that would define 1918. You see, 1917 didn't end the Great War, it created the end game. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.